Amen. A number of years ago, seems like longer and longer all the time, I was involved in an automobile accident. It actually occurred several days before Christmas Eve. It was one of the few Christmas Eve services I missed over my pastoral career because of the injury sustained. I and another person, we had just finished playing tennis and were returning home that evening, and as we were turning left, a service vehicle ran a red light and blasted into the side of the car we were in. Being in the passenger side, I was very fortunate that most of the impact hit directly on the right front axle, and so my injuries, which could have been fatal, were not. Nonetheless, the paramedics came and they extricated us from the car and took me to the nearest hospital, where I whined and complained and moaned and groaned vociferously about my shoulder because it hurt and because I did not think the doctor was paying adequate attention to me. And he wasn't. Every time he would come over, I'd say, my shoulder, it hurt. That's where the injury is. And he says, okay, I'm going to take some x-rays and pictures of your stomach. You don't get it. It hurts here. What are you looking for down here? And he kept going away and coming back, and time was going on, till finally it felt like I grabbed him. Not something I recommend you do to a physician. And I said, you don't understand. My shoulder hurts. And he said to me, as professionally as he could, you don't understand that I need to take photos, pictures, and tests of your abdomen because the pain in your shoulder may have its source and its origin in your lower body. In other words, the injuries that you have sustained may be down here, even though it hurts up here. And if I treat this and not this, you may be in worse shape than you are. It's called referred pain. In other words, the source resonates to another place, either through nerves or other things. And the physician knows this, even though in my arrogant ignorance, I did not. It was a great new learning for me, and perhaps in modern medicine, a relatively new one there, I don't know. But what I do know in reading this text is that 2,000 years ago, Jesus knew this. Jesus already knew about this referred pain thing. And it's evident in his encounter with this Samaritan woman when he talks to her, because he asks probing questions. He leads her on. He offers her potential cures and solutions to her issues. And she seeks, look at this. There is a pairing, there's a boxing match going on here between him and her. And he asks something, and she tries to sidetrack him. And he comes back with another one, and she wants to push him over here. She wants to redirect the conversation to where she feels safe, where she can maintain it on a superficial level. She can control the conversation. And why not? I suspect that she had survived doing this for years. It's successful behavior. We all do it. It is a learned behavior. It is employed whenever someone broaches a part of our life or a pain or a hurt that we would rather not have them probe. Somebody goes there and we redirect the conversation immediately. Someone touches our personalities or some issue that we would just rather bury. It's not that we are unaware of this. On some level, I suspect, subconsciously even, we all know that because of it, we are not meeting our own expectations. We are not finding what we need in our existence. We know something isn't right. It's just that it's always easier to blame something else, cause a distraction this way, ask the doctor for some new medication, find some different clothing to cover ourselves up, divert our attention. It's easier to do those things than to address the real emotional, psychological, or spiritual issues that haunt us. But Jesus is not just the great physician. Jesus is the one who specializes in soul surgery. He doesn't let her get away with it. He doesn't let us get away with it. He doesn't let his disciples get away with it. Do you remember the story as the Passion comes along, the last week of Christ, and Holy Week comes, and Jesus says, I must suffer and die, and you're going to run away. All of you will run away. And Peter stands up and says, I will never deny you. And Jesus looks at him and kind of smiles and says, get out of town. I know you better than that. You will deny me not once, but 3 times, and it'll only take seconds. You see, Jesus doesn't buy this stuff. Jesus doesn't get fooled by our misdirecting actions, persuasive arguments, or evasive excuses that hold everyone else at bay. Because Jesus wants to heal and bring real change to our lives. And to do that, Jesus knows he needs to get down to the nitty-gritty. Jesus needs to dig deep into our souls. So he says to the woman, let's not talk about where Jews or Samaritans worship. I understand all that. Let's not discuss your physical needs or all the relationships you've been in and out. I know all about them. It's cute and it's clever, but who are you trying to fool? I know you. You see, we want Jesus to know our hurts, but we want to identify which hurts we want him to know. And Jesus says, come on, let's get down to the heart of it. Let's talk about who and what rules your soul. Poor self-esteem, lack of purpose, direction, a sense of emptiness, incompleteness, a desire to look for love in all the wrong places. Jesus says these are the real issues, and they have nothing to do with your religious persuasion or your ethnic background or which side of the tracks you grew up on. So quit pointing at them and blaming them. Jesus says this is about your relationship with God. What moves and what motivates you, in whom you find your well-being and your sense of purpose and satisfaction, from whom you receive your self-worth, and until you accept that and know that and believe that, nothing else is going to change. And you read that story, and when the woman got it, with eyes wide open, there initiates a difference in the conversation that exudes energy and enthusiasm that she has to share with others. There is an apparent change in her spirit and her heart that is obvious, not just to Jesus, to us who read the text, but to all those she came in touch with. She was a different person. She got it. I'm sure it's very hard for most of you to believe, but once upon a time, I received a speeding ticket. Because I was in a hurry to get somewhere. It was a number of years back. I was working for President Ford at the time, and I had been assigned the state convention in Washington State, and several days later had to be at the state convention in Colorado, so I needed to get from Spokane to Fort Collins rather rapidly, and these were not the days of the lucrative nature that surrounds campaigns and the people who run them. We lived and ate and slept often in our cars. Anyway, I was given this assignment, and thank goodness that in Montana there is no speed limit. But one can easily forget that or take that for granted when you cross that fine line between Montana and Wyoming. And as I passed at a rather rapid pace through the grand metropolis of Chugwater, Wyoming, and reached the far side, over hills, hill and vale, there was a state patrolman parked in the middle of the road with his lights flashing, waving me to the side. As he got out with his mirrored glasses and escorted me back to Mayberry RFD, where they were talking, the women behind the counter were talking about the pies that they were going to make and take to the 4th of July picnic. I asked them when and where the judge was and when he would come, and they seemed a bit annoyed because he was fishing. And they had to bother him, and he had to come in, which he did with his vest on and the hooks in it, and the golf hat with all the little hooks and things, and they pulled one of those Venetian blind partitions back, and there was a little school desk there and an old oak desk, and he told me to sit down, and I sat down on the other side, and he said, "Okay, boy, what do you got to say?" And I said, "Well, sir, you know, I have oversized tires on my car, so I'm sure my speedometer is off a little." I don't know, I came up with a few other things, and every time I said something, he looked at me and he said, "Ain't gonna matter. What do you got to say? It ain't gonna matter. It ain't gonna matter." You know, he gave me the maximum fine. I wrote him a check, and I kind of flipped it on his desk and said, "I hope you use it to fix all the potholes out there." You ever heard of contempt of court? But what's the point? The point is he didn't let me off. No matter what excuse I came up with, no matter where I wanted to turn or blame, which all seemed really reasonable to me. I even pulled out the President Ford card, and I'm sure he's a Reagan delegate. He didn't let me off the hook. He just kept bringing me back to the point, bringing me back to the point, bringing me back to the point, which is precisely what Jesus did to this woman. Precisely where Jesus would go with us. Years ago, while in seminary, I worked as a chaplain, hospital chaplain at University Hospital in Boston, where we did our clinical pastoral education, a part of our training to help people dealing with illness and sickness and disease. The process was we would visit people on the different wards assigned to patients, and then we would have to pick one and write a verbatim. And the verbatim had a very specific protocol where we had to write out the full conversation and people's response, the full conversation with the patient we visited. And then we bring it into the group, and the group would get at what we were doing in terms of pastoral care and any other underlying issues. Well, I had one person in the group with us, a woman who would visit an older woman in the hospital on the oncology ward, so she visited her for a long time repeatedly. The interesting thing was, every time she brought in her verbatim, her conversation, and we read it, it seemed that when she visited this woman, she always left in the midst of an argument. So she'd go into the hospital to talk to this woman, to pastor to this woman, and get in a fight with her. And we wondered, why did this occur? Why does it occur? I mean, because that's not what she was called to do or wanted to do. And after weeks of probing and questioning and discussing, what finally came out, what this woman shared for the first time, is that the patient she visited reminded her of her grandmother. And she argued with her, not knowing it, but subconsciously she argued with her because she'd never forgiven her grandmother for the fact that her grandfather had sexually abused her, and her grandmother knew it and had never done anything to save her. And so every time she visited this woman, that was playing itself out. And until she acknowledged that and dealt with that, she could not be healed and move on. You see, I suspect that what the gospel writer gives us here in this story regarding Jesus' conversation with this woman is really the Cliff Notes version. You know, she goes away and she says, "This man told me everything about my life." We just get a snippet of what went on. I think there was much more. And even if not, I can still imagine that there was a revelation that took place between these two that opened up a deeper conversation, something that helped her to know that despite her brokenness, God still loved her. That despite how she had felt used by others, Jesus still saw value in her, worth in her, and he loved her for that. She just needed to see it and accept it. She needed to act upon it for herself, ridding herself of the demons that haunted her from her past, ceasing to allow others to have power through their opinions over her, accepting that her true worth comes not from what people say around her or society says about her, but what God does from above. So what I want you to do today is to ask yourselves where Christ can make a difference in your life. Where are the spots in your soul, in your spirit, in your world that when they are touched, they hurt? And you'd rather bury and avoid them. And yet Christ says, own them. Look at them, properly place them in order that together we can fix them and you can be healed for real and be made whole. Because if you don't, if you keep them buried or covered up, you can go on. Countless people do. But you cannot go on with the peace and joy that God desires for all of God's children. And so Jesus says, drink. Drink deeply, because there's living water there, and with it comes life. Amen.